It's time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist, and you can also find information in the description below of where you can buy this wonderful, wonderful book. 3rd grade, 1920 to 1921. Miss Dorothy's Baby. Everyone just fussed over little Kenneth and his pretty clothes and fancy carriage. All the girls wanted to hold him or push his carriage around, but only Annie, my cousin, and one of the older students was allowed to take care of him without Miss Dorothy there. During lunchtime, Annie would go down to the dwelling house to watch Kenneth. Then after lunch, it was Annie's job to go up to the schoolhouse and ring the school bell to take up books, as they called it. On nice days, Miss Dorothy would let her put Kenneth in his carriage and stroll him up to the schoolhouse when she went to ring the bell. Gladys and I liked to tag along, and usually Annie would let me ring the bell, probably because I was almost always the very first one to grab the rope. When I jumped on the rope, I loved the way the weight of the bell would pull me back up. The top of the clapper was shaped like a hook and went over a rod inside the bell. If the rope was pulled too hard, the bell would hit the clapper too fast, and the force on the clapper would knock it off the rod and it would fall out. We had all been warned about that many times, and we knew that it could be very dangerous. Well, one day, all 3 of us had jumped on that rope at the same time, and that's exactly what happened. The clapper fell out. We thought the whole chapel schoolhouse was falling down. It was a real miracle when that 42-pound clapper fell. It stuck 2 or 3 inches into the 2x6 above our heads. If it had come on down, it would have killed us or baby Kenneth, whose carriage was right under where the clapper was stuck in the wood. I still think about that till yet. Whenever I go to ring the bell at church, I always think about how near that clapper came to killing us or that little baby. Mama's apple tree. That little fugate apple tree that Mama planted just after we moved into the cabin had grown to a good size, but had not yet produced any apples. Finally, after we moved into the new house, Mama noticed the blossoms on the tree. There weren't many, but to Mama it was like a dream come true. She watched those blossoms. Every day she watched those blossoms. Like the good Lord knows when each little sparrow falls, Mama knew when the fugate tree lost a blossom. All summer and on into the fall, Mama guarded that tree and its precious yield of 3 nice big apples. Harvest time was almost here, and those apples were the most beautiful, forbidden fruit any of us had laid our eyes on. Mama had told us firmly and repeatedly, "Now I don't want one of you to pull the apples off that tree. I don't want you to shake those apples off or knock 'em off. I want 'em to get ripe." Well, I couldn't stand the thought of having to wait to taste those delicious fugates that she had been talking about for years now. So one day, when she wasn't home, I slipped out there to that apple tree, and ever so painstakingly I tied every one of those apples to the limbs with a white string, making sure they wouldn't fall off. And then I ate big chunks out of them, all 3 of them. When Mama came home, it seemed that was the first thing she noticed. "What happened to my apples?" she screamed as she turned around and looked directly at me. And when she placed her hands on her hips and gave me that look, I knew I was in a heap of trouble. Oh, how I wished at that moment that I had not been standing right there by her when she discovered the big bites I had taken out of every one of her apples. I'd been very careful not to be disobedient, and I had tied them on the tree to be extra sure. "Mama, you said not to pull them off, or shake them off, or knock them off. I never—" "What?" she yelled. "I never done a one of those. They're right there on the tree yet." She couldn't whip me because she knew I had done what she said. That little tree continued to grow, and for all the years that we lived in the new house, it produced the best tasting apples and jelly. Peas and corn. We raised a lot of vegetables, too. That year we had so many peas that Papa boxed up the sides of one of the beds and poured the peas in there under the mattress until we could get them all shelled. It takes a long time to shell peas, especially that many. Of course, now I was always one to look for better ways to get a hard job done while having fun at the same time. So whenever Mama would leave the house for a few minutes, we would jump up on the bed and dance on those peas. Our dancing shelled them out, and we didn't have to do a one of them by hand. All we had to do was pick the hulls out. In the fall, we gathered in our corn, shucked it, and after it dried, we would shell it. Every morning, Burl and I got up early to take a turn of corn to the mill. We each put about a half a bushel of corn in a sack and carry it over our shoulders. The teachers understood that even the young children had chores to do, and Miss Martson didn't care if we were late as long as we got back in time for arithmetic class. We would try to beat everyone to the mill so we'd get ours ground first and get back in time for class. Sometimes Uncle Charlie would let some older person go before us so they wouldn't have to wait so long, even though we'd got there first. That would get us so mad. He was supposed to grind ours first if we got there first. I thought that was like a law, a promise. You had to do what you were supposed to do. You had to take your turn. The mill took out an eighth of the grain as a toll. Sometimes Uncle Charlie would tease us and make us think he was going to take out 3 or 4 tolls, and we'd fuss at him. Winter in the new house. At first the new house was pretty good. We loved all of our windows and the way the light filled the house. Everything seemed more cheerful when we could see the outside, the trees and Mama's flowers. Many times in our former cabin, we had to use lanterns even in the daytime to be able to see, especially when the weather was bad and we couldn't leave the door open. Our cabin may not have had pretty windows, but it had been warm in the winter, where our new house was cold. All the wood was green when Papa built the house. It never occurred to him what a problem that would be. During that summer, the green wood started to dry out, and by the time winter came, there were spaces between the boards big enough to stick your fingers through. Our new house did not hold the heat at all. By bedtime, it would be so cold that we would have to stand in front of the fireplace to change clothes for bed. It was a tempting thought to climb into bed without changing into our gowns, but I don't know what Mama would have done if she had caught one of us trying to go to bed with our clothes on. We wore the same clothes every day for school, and then when we got home, we changed into the same work clothes we had worn the day before. Mama was strict about our clothes and how we took care of them. No matter how tired we were or how cold it was, we had to pull off everything and put on our night clothes. Then we would pick up the clothes we had just taken off, hurry to hang them up on our nail, and quickly jump under the covers as fast as we could. I slept against the wall in a feather bed, and Maggie slept on the other side of me. Our bed had a big long bolster pillow that went all the way across the top. I'd put that pillow under the quilts lengthwise down between the cold wall and me. That extra insulation made it warmer, like sleeping with someone between me and the outside. Then I would pull the quilts up over my head, leaving just a little tunnel so I could breathe fresh air. By the time we woke up in the morning, the fire had died down to nothing but coals, and the inside of the house would be freezing. When it snowed during the night, the snow would blow right in through those cracks in the walls, and in the morning there would be a blanket of snow on the beds and floor. We would wait for Papa or Burl to build up the fire. When the fire got going good, we would then take turns running to dress in front of it. If it had snowed during the night, we would slip out of bed carefully and shake the snow off of our quilts before it melted, being sure we didn't get snow between the covers. There would actually be enough snow on the floor to track us to the fireplace. We didn't pay any attention to the person dressing or worry about privacy. But then, on the other hand, with 8 people living in the same 2-room house, we probably didn't realize what privacy was. We just stayed in bed with our heads covered up, trying to keep warm until it was our turn to get dressed. During the day, the heat of the house would melt the snow and dry the quilts. The next night, we'd curl back in bed and it would snow again. It seemed to snow a lot more frequently, and the snows were deeper back when I was younger. We soon started stuffing rags and paper in the cracks between the wall planks to keep the snow and sharp winter wind out. Mama never complained about the coldness of the house. She never said a thing about the cracks between the boards. Cold weather was not surprising in the wintertime, but we did expect it to be at least a little warmer inside than it was outside. We weren't brought up to complain about something you couldn't change. Not much sense in it. We were told, don't be complaining if and you can't find a way to make it better. Keep yourself quiet about it. We wanted our house to look neat and pretty, so at first, when the walls were new, we didn't want to ruin them by pasting any old kind of paper we could find over the boards, like many of the other folks around here did. But it wasn't too long before we decided it was better to be warm than uppity. First, we pasted paper all over the north wall. Before winter was over, we had paper covering every single one, just like everyone else. We even nailed rugs to the wall. After all, things were difficult enough in the winter. There was certainly no need to freeze to death inside your own house. I did not know it was going to rain like this, and now I'm wondering if you'll be able to hear me and if I should relocate. Maybe I should. Okay, maybe this will be quieter. We'll continue. Even in the winter, the children walked to school. Most everybody wore big old heavy shoes that they got from the mission. We'd call them little boots, but they weren't really boots. They were just heavy shoes to keep the snow off your feet. Since we lived so close, we didn't miss much school because of snow. When several inches had accumulated overnight, Papa would take a broom and walk before us up to the chapel, sweeping a path up the road so we wouldn't have to get in the snow. Papa would also sweep the boardwalks around the dwelling house for the chapel women. That's the kind of man your great-grandfather was, Lori. Miss Frances Martson. Come a real bad day, when most of the children couldn't get to school, those of us who lived close would go to the dwelling house. Our teacher, Miss Frances Martson, had come from England with her family when she was 12 years old and had lived in several different places growing up. She had seen so many things and met so many different people. Why, she had even worked with the Indians in California. Her papa was in some way connected with Maryville College, and her brother had a flour mill at Bridgeport. Miss Martson was an older lady who never married and seemed quite content doing mission work. Somehow, Reverend E.V. Tadlock, who was then head of the Presbyterian mission schools, found out about her and was able to convince her to come and head up Ebenezer Mission. Miss Martson was a great teacher, and I'm so glad she came to our community. She gave us all a sense of purpose and encouraged us to follow our desires. Many lives were greatly changed because of her. I know because I'm one of those. Of all the people I've ever known, Miss Martson was the most influential. On those very snowy days, we would stay inside the dwelling house where it was nice and warm. We could read or look at pictures in the pretty books from the bookshelf. Pretty books, that's what we called the books that had a lot of pictures of beautiful places, animals, and things we had never seen before. Sometimes we would write in our journals, and other times we would just meander around, but she wouldn't let us talk. My favorite thing to do on those days was watch Miss Martson draw or paint. Sometimes she would even show us how to draw things, or she would show us other paintings she had done and tell us stories about them. She had some of the prettiest views of the mountains and other places she had been. I'd like to sit and watch her and listen to her talk of those other places while she shared her wonderful stories about all kinds of things. We all thought she talked quite odd, of course, with her accent, which was different than the other chapel women. She told us about Shakespeare and the cottages in England. with their flower beds and herb gardens, and about battles that happened in England and France. She talked about faraway places and kings and queens in such a casual way, like they were just everyday things. We knew all about the Queen of England and the royal family and Windsor Castle. Through her stories and tales, we traveled the world. We talked of those places and things just like you'd talk about going to Gatlinburg. She created every detail, making our world so much bigger. We were familiar with the world and some of its history before we even studied history in school. We learned a lot more than the students at the public school. Miss Martson told us make-believe stories, too. She called some of them parables and explained how Jesus had used parables to give us a truth with a deep, hidden meaning. Somehow her stories always made you think and wonder. Some stories, like this one, I've remembered all these years. Miss Martson's parable. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there was a young boy who was a prince, but this prince was not free. His palace had been captured by a cruel enemy who made all the people slaves. The prince was locked up in the palace and forced to work as a servant. He had to work very hard and do things that no other prince would have to do. Many times the young prince wanted to complain or do more than what was required of him to stay alive, but somehow deep down inside he knew that he must learn all that he could about everything. Someday he may have an opportunity to escape, and with whatever knowledge he had, he would be able to come back and set his kingdom free, and that's just what happened. This was how Miss Martson explained her parable. Sometimes in our country, and even in our community, we can have a cruel enemy too, but our enemy is usually not other people. Our enemy can be sickness and disease. It can be poverty and hard times. It can be ignorance and superstitions. Our enemy may be not having an education. So like the prince, we need to know who our enemy is. Then we must learn all that we can about everything. We must be ready to escape from our enemy so that we can help set the people of our kingdom free. Germs. The mission people were the first ones we had ever heard talk about germs. Miss Martson had a big poster of a man standing by a tree looking like he was scared to death. There were two little girls on the other side of the tree pulling each other back. The man had just spit on the ground, and in the spit there were big, ugly germ bugs with mean faces running around. There was a caption where one little girl was saying, "Where's your hanky, Mr. Man? Aren't you old enough to know if you spit on the ground like that, it spreads disease around?" The other little girl said, "I learned that in first grade." Miss Martson had other posters about holding a handkerchief over your mouth. I had never heard before of germs, and I had never seen big posters like that. It was about this time that all the students were given their own tin cup. I guess those posters did what they were supposed to do. I'm getting close to 80 years old, and I still remember those germ bugs. Interesting, isn't it? We'll stop right there thinking about germs. I don't know how old I would have been when I first learned about germs. Probably not very old, but I probably learned not maybe from an adult, but from thinking about maybe even Steve, an older sibling or cousin or something that would say, "Ooh, yucky, gross germs." I don't know. Might be. This part's really interesting. Probably one of the things I think is most interesting is the house, about how cold it was and how her daddy didn't know that if he cut the wood green and then used it, how it would shrink. It seems like he would have known that, but then again, with the log cabins that they were used to building, I mean, this house, remember, was different. It was a plank-built house. So he didn't have as much experience with that because there was none of those houses around him. Now the mission was built like that, but of course they knew that, and they had probably brought the lumber in from somewhere else, and it had already been dried. But it makes you feel sorry for him, don't it? For all of them, not understanding that that's how it worked, and then being really cold, and then having to give in to the fact, well, they just have to paste up paper in their house too. It makes you wish you could go back and show them what insulation is, today, the way we insulate our houses. So that part was interesting, sad, but interesting. And you've probably, like me, you've probably heard a lot of people talk about how cold it was in houses, and about the snow, little snow getting through the cracks, and having to sleep under so many covers that you couldn't move, they were so heavy. And that little run from the fire to the bed, I've certainly heard other people talk about that too. Now, in the very beginning, interesting when she's talking about Miss Dorothy had her baby Kenneth, and how they all wanted to dote on him and babysit him, but she would only let those certain girls, the older girls, were the ones that she would let take care of him. I loved kids like that when I was little. I just loved them, and I'm thinking about church was a place I got to see a lot of kids. I had kids in my family too, but some of the little kids at church was just so cute, and I wasn't even big as nothing, but I'd try to hold them and carry them around, and they'd be about as big as I was, but I'd try to carry them around because I just loved them. And then I see some of the little kids, thinking about Opal's age, about this age at our church now, trying to carry around little kids, that are about half as big as they are. Reminds me, though, of that, of how everybody just always wanted to be around the kids and talk to them, and they were so cute and sweet. And especially with Kenneth here, Miss Dorothy's, because, they were interested. I'm sure he was a cute baby, but they were interested in that baby carriage that they had never seen before, and in the clothing that he wore that they had never seen before. So you can just picture that. And then the ringing of the bell too. Not even many churches today have church bells that pull like that with a big bell. Now there are some in my area, and maybe there is where you live. You'll have to tell me. Our church still has a bell like that, and I just love it. One of the old traditions, which is no longer observed here in our area, of course, because it's not needed. Everybody, if an elder of your community passes away, everybody just knows it. They see it on Facebook, or maybe your church has an all call or something like that. But Pap told me when he was a boy, local churches, like maybe here local where I'm at, the closest one would have probably been Magus Chapel, and excuse me, I'm about to lose my voice. Someone would go to the church, like if somebody did pass away, and then they would ring the bell, and then you counted the number of times it rung, and that equated the amount of lives or years they had lived. So maybe it rung 85 times, and you think, oh, that's old man Mason. I know he's been sickly, and he's 85. I bet he's passed away. In the same way, sometimes they'd use those bells like for an emergency, like something had happened, and they'd ring it, and people would be like, why's the church bell ringing? Something must have happened. And maybe they'd go and they'd find out somebody was in desperate need, or somebody was really sick, or maybe even, it might call people to realize somebody's house was on fire or something like that. So real interesting how those used to be. And not just the church bell or the school bell, I even think about the dinner bell. Used to be much more important in day-to-day life than, of course, today when we have instant communication. But I still love to hear our church bell ring. I hope they always keep it. And I wonder about people in the community, if they're just so used to it they probably don't even hear it. People that live near the church maybe, but maybe they really like it too. And then, my goodness, Opal and the apples. Didn't you just want to pinch her head off? I mean, how could she have done that to her dear mother? And she was so methodical about it, how she tied the apples on to make sure they didn't really come off. She didn't take them off the tree. She really thought that out. That shows how smart she was. She really thought about this and thought, I'm going to eat those apples, but I'm not going to disobey what Mother said. Of course, reminds you of the book Amelia Bedelia. If you ever read that, I read it when I was a girl, and then I read it to Katie and Corey. But how she takes everything literal. When the wealthy lady told her to draw the drapes, to close them so the sunshine wouldn't come in and ruin the furniture. Instead, she sat down and drew them, and put the thing up, and changed the towels. She cut them. So Opal was doing that a little bit, and I could just imagine, though, the mother's disappointment. And then me, I think, Opal, why didn't you just eat one of them? Why didn't you leave the others? But she bit out of all of them, every apple. I'm sure as years went on, after her mama got over being upset with her, that was probably a tale that the family told a lot and laughed about, I would imagine. But she's definitely a little rat there, a little rat about the apples. And then going to the meal, like her talking about her and Burl having to go every morning before school, or maybe not every morning, but when they would go, they'd try to go in the morning so they'd get done first. Cornmeal was such a big part of their diet in those days. And, my pap, he's told me when he was a boy how there was always someone having to go to the mill. And you didn't want to go and get it all ground. Like you think, well, why didn't they just get it all ground and then they'd have it? It's because it would go bad. It lasted much better in the dried corn form than if you got it all ground into cornmeal. It would go bad on you, or weevils might get in it, bugs might get in it. So it was just a constant thing. Every week or ever so often you had to go and get fresh corn ground, so then you could make your cornbread, your cornmeal mush, all those wonderful things to eat. So that was interesting that even the kids were sent, which I know Pap's told me stories about him being sent himself when he was a boy, and even told me, because of where we lived, the various, which meals he would go to at different times. Every community had a meal, and some communities had more than one, so you had a choice of where to go. And then the last thing I wrote down was just Miss Martson. You can, like Opal says, what else do we need? Opal says she was the greatest influence on her life. So really impressive how she come there and dedicated her life to those children and to the community too. She didn't just help the children, and taught them about so much. And like Opal saying, they learned about history before they had actually learned about history in school. So just so much that she taught them. And then even thinking about how they got to look at her stuff, at her books, and watch her draw and paint, and then hear all of her wonderful stories, and then like the parable that she shared with them. So she definitely was trying to instruct them, even on those days when it was too bad to have school, but because Opal and her family lived so close, they could just go. They could just, they could make it there. And really sweet to think about that, and think about how Miss Martson influenced not just Opal, I'm sure, but all of them. And then you wonder if she ever really knew that she did, if she ever knew. So often in our lives somebody influences us, and that person may never realize if you don't get the opportunity to tell them after you're grown, because when you're kids you don't think about that. And then as a grown-up, though, you can look back and see, I can do that. I can look back and see there's mentors, even down to like one of the first jobs I ever had at Cato's. I had a dear boss there named Doris, and she really mentored us. And there's things that she told me that I remember all these years later. She probably never realized how she was being a good impressing on us, being a good influence on me and the other young girls that I worked with. And she had a son that was our age, so she was definitely old enough to be our mother. But just so many things she taught me that I still remember today. And I don't really think she was trying to be that kind of influence, but she was, and she was a good one. So we never know about those things. I'm sure you can think of people in your lives that did the exact same thing. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the book. Please leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll drop back by next Friday, and we'll see what happens to Opal next.